Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. Lots of stuff to talk about this week. Quite a momentous week. Ingenuity managed to fly off in Mars. Shows what we can do for man on other planets. And also, we had a momentous decision in the murder trial of George Floyd, showing what we can do on Earth as a society to advance justice for all men and women. I thought I'd take some time today to go over kind of the world data, what's going on in the U.S. and Texas with COVID, but also talk about some of the stuff that's been going on, remembering the past, some of the outbreaks of the past here in the country, and talk about some of the vaccine progress and what's going on with J&J. The first thing is that the world is going through a very interesting phase right now. We're not doing all that great. We've done pretty well in the U.S. Israel's doing great. The rest of the world, not so much. And the biggest problem is India. India's cases are out of control. Increase of 63% in India. And they now lead in new cases in the world today. Brazil is a close second. And the United States, of course, has now dropped to third. But the fact of the matter is, it's not going so well because of these giant outbreaks, a little bit like what's going on in Michigan in the United States. To be optimistic, look at Israel. Israel has managed to vaccinate almost half of its population, and already its rates have dropped by 30%. So that's really, really good. Now, if you look nationally at the country, you know, we were talking about thousands, 2,000s, 3,000 deaths per day. We're down to under 1,000 pretty consistently, but still 700 deaths a day is nothing to be happy about. And we're averaging 70,000 cases a day. Just a few weeks ago, it was 50,000. Now we're chugging up 60,000, 70,000. That's up 5% from the previous 2 weeks. So that's a real problem, and we already know now that at least 30 million people have been infected. If you look at the prevalence data where we have looked, just whether you know it or not, you've been infected, it's 4 times more than the number we really know about. So if it's 30 million that we know about, it's probably 120 million in the U.S., which, you know, is a third of the population of the United States is probably infected with COVID. And my biggest concern about that is we're at a plateau. We're not going down anymore. And if you look at where we are, our plateau is actually significantly higher than the plateau we hit in September. And I hate the fact that we're still higher rates now than we were in September because that, you know, if there's a surge, it's going to go up. It's just a race between the vaccine and the variants. And, you know, I've quoted the IHME data, the people that do the sort of prognosticating from the University of Washington. And we seem to be stuck on that plateau that I was very concerned about, where we had this small surge and we just continue to have a consistent number of cases. And it's like the race between good and evil. It's vaccines versus variants. And the vaccines are keeping it down and the variants are pushing it up. And the trouble is we're stuck. We're not going down anymore. We're just stuck. And the reason I hate being stuck and not falling is if we just chug along like this through the summer, you know, we're all going to be looking at each other in the fall going, like, what do we do? Cases aren't really all that low. What do we do about schools? What do we do about it, you know, going back to work? It's just, we need to get the cases down. Interestingly enough, just like India is driving the world's cases, Michigan, where I went to college, University of Michigan is driving the case count in the United States. I mean, it is really out of control. And, you know, they're not all that clear why. It's almost certainly because the UK variant is dominant there, so it's highly infectious. And it may be paradoxically because they did a pretty good job of shutting down the state and kept a lot of people from getting infected. Well, once the UK variant showed up, there are all these uninfected people. And, of course, Michigan is very big on, like, no masks. If you're upstate Michigan, they don't like to wear masks. And guess where it's worse? Upstate Michigan. Anyway, in Texas, we're not doing so bad. We've been at a plateau, but the good news about our plateau is we are down to about where we were in September. So we're not doing as great as I'd like, but we're doing better than other parts of the country. And if you look at the counties, I keep asking, I don't know what's going on in Dimmitt and Carnes County, but every week those people are running, they're leading the pack. So I'm not sure what they're doing, but would you please stop it? Whatever you're doing, just knock it off. Got to talk to those people. So here in the Texas Medical Center, we're doing exactly like everything else. We're sort of stuck. Our number has been at 1. We want it to be like 0.6, 0.5. It just stays at 1 because our case number continues to be pretty high. It's under 1,000, which is good, and we're sort of stuck at that 5% case rate for positivity. I would love it to be lower, but we just don't seem to be getting lower. And if you look at the rolling 7-day average of cases, you can really see we're just stuck at this plateau. Nobody wants to be in a plateau. We want to be in the valley, but we're not getting there. Now, hospitalizations, unfortunately, as one of our viewers likes to point out, they're not only plateaued, but they've been trickling up a little bit. So that's a little bit of a concern. And each of our hospitals is now reporting that a younger group of people are being hospitalized. So that's a big concern, and probably reflects what's going on with the variants. And as I said, it's a race between getting vaccinations and variants. We've now vaccinated 785,000 people in the Texas Medical Center systems, and about 1.5 million people have had at least one dose. So we're making progress. You know, we're getting there, but it's slower than anybody wants. So you remember that prevalence study? 7 million people in the greater Houston area. About 30% have been infected, so that's 2.1 million, 1.5 million people vaccinated. That's 3.6. We got to get to 4.5, 4.6 to reach herd immunity. So it's going to be a while. Now, I was amused. This is not amusing, but I was amused. The CDC went back and sort of reported notable outbreaks. It's like, I don't know if you're on Sirius. I like to watch or turn on 80s. Channel 8 on 80s or 7 70s. Well, the CDC did that, little memory lane of all the great outbreaks in the past. So remember, back in the old days, it all started with nursing homes. Well, then there were a bunch of cruise ships. Then there were meat packing plants. There were 16,000 infections and 86 deaths tied to the meat and poultry producing. Remember, we actually were running on meat for a while. Military vessels, we can't leave them out. And then TSA officials all over the country were getting infected. Manufacturing plants infected. Wynn Las Vegas Resorts had a giant outbreak. And the New York Times had a great article. It was actually, if you're a reporter these days, you're looking for something to do, go find a few outbreaks. Well, there were 500,000 cases that were clusters that we may not know about. And so they went through and looked at blasts from the past. So one of the ones I did know about, which was really bad, was early on, there were 100 people who attended a Biogen 10 pharmaceutical conference in Boston. Those are scientists, our people from all over the world, came to Boston for the Biogen 10 pharmaceutical conference, and then seeded thousands of cases around the United States. That was very early in the pandemic, so our team of scientists was working hard to spread virus all over. One of my favorite ones was 117 cases that were linked to the Pickled Loon restaurant in St. Cloud, Minnesota. I can't wait to get there. There were 85 people infected on the American Triumph fishing vessel in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, so we don't want to leave out, Alaska. And 50 at an Independence Day party in Harrisonville, Missouri. Remember, we talked about the birthday party in Texas, the anniversary party in Iowa, and now 50 at an independence party in Harrisonville, Missouri. And of course, the question I got last summer by everybody, can I send my kid to camp? Sure, send him to camp. 82 got infected at Christian summer camp in Missouri, in the Missouri Ozarks. So, you think about when we talked early on about how this virus spreads. It's not just person to person. It's really these series of outbreaks. You get somebody who's infected and a group of people who are all in close contact. And that's really what has driven this. It's a series of multiple outbreaks. And that's why, people practicing safe spatial distancing and wearing masks have been able to prevent it. It's the people who drop their masks and joined the bar, the celebratory bar in Illinois last week we talked about, where 100 people were there and half of them got infected. So as I say, it's a race between the variants and the vaccine. So we're doing pretty well in the United States on vaccination, really pretty well. We've now had at least 132 million people have a single dose and 85 million have been fully vaccinated. So that's about a quarter of the U.S. population, and half of adults in the United States have received at least one dose. Mostly it's been Pfizer, Moderna a close second, and as you know, Johnson & Johnson's been put on pause. We'll find out today what happens. We've now had enough experience to realize, when we say it's 95% effective, that means that 5% get infected anyway. And we're now getting a lot of experience about what's called breakthrough infections after vaccination. So as of April 20th, we've had 85 million people who have been fully vaccinated, and as I mentioned, more than 50% of adult Americans. In that group, there have been 5,814 documented cases of infection of COVID-19 and 65 COVID-related deaths in people fully vaccinated. And half of those were over the age of 60. Interestingly enough, about 30% of the breakthrough infections were asymptomatic. Only 7% of the people who were vaccinated were hospitalized, and there was 1%, or a total of 65, who died. So the vaccines protect a lot. They do not protect fully, but they seem to do a really great job at preventing from serious hospitalization and fatality. You remember when we talked about the trials, 100% effective? Well, that's when you're studying 40,000 people. It's different when you're studying 85 million people. And so there are fatalities in people who've been infected. And it's why we're still cautious about wearing masks and all that and avoiding large gatherings until the rest of the country is more fully vaccinated. Israel has similar results, a little bit better. Of the 5 million people who have been fully vaccinated, there have been 150 breakthrough infections. Interestingly enough, since they've been doing it longer, the variants don't seem to be the reason. It's all varieties of virus. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the advisory committee is contemplating, this thrombocytopenia and clotting. We're learning more and more about this complication. It's very similar to what's called heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, or HIT, and that is a very rare side effect seen in people who are given heparin as an anticoagulant. And what happens is heparin is a large molecule that's negatively charged, and it binds to a particular compound in the body called platelet factor 4, which is released from platelets. And this platelet factor 4 is very positive, so it binds to the highly negatively charged heparin molecule. And as a complex that sometimes, in very rare cases, will induce the body to see it as a foreign, and the body will generate antibodies to it. And when that happens, you get an antibody to the platelet, and and because it's activated, you also get clotting. It's very nicely shown in this particular diagram where heparin binds the platelet factor 4. You get a platelet aggregation and clotting, even though the platelet count is going because you have antibodies against it. So what is going on, with the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccines? As a disclaimer, we do not know completely yet, but some people thought it was, the spike protein. It might be the spike protein that is because it binds in similar site, might be that. But we know that's probably not the case because the mRNA vaccines do not have the same complication. More likely, it's the vector. It's the adenoviral vector. Now, adenovirus vectors, when you get injected, you have 50 billion virus particles at each dose of AstraZeneca. And DNA can act just like heparin. It's a negatively charged large molecule. And the thought is that in some very rare instances, the platelet factor 4 binds to the DNA from the DNA viruses and might induce an antibody response in a similar way that it does with heparin. That's, I think, the most likely explanation. There's another possibility that people already have an antibody to their platelets and that the vaccination just boosts the antibody. I think that's less likely, but it's also a possibility. Some people had hypothesized that it only happened in people who had an infection before, but all the cases in Norway were people who were uninfected, so that's not the case. So I think it's pretty clear it's going to be something like what heparin does. So what can we do? It's a very rare complication. So, the advisory committee has to constantly be weighing risk versus benefit. So if you think about, what the odds of dying from COVID are, we've talked about it many times. The case fatality rate is about 0.5%. With the UK variant, in the UK they've suggested it's 0.6%, goes up to 0.9%, so even more. But let's just say it's 0.5%. That's 5,000 people in a million. And even if you say, well, it's younger people getting it, so it's lower. So let's say it's a couple thousand in a million. So far, the clotting problem seen with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is 1 in a million. So we're talking thousands in a million versus 1 in a million. Now, the odds of dying in a car accident are about 150 in a million. And you don't sit there and go, I'm not driving my car because I got 150 in a million chance I'm going to be in an accident and killed. So, when you start thinking about the relative risk of this, it's pretty low. Now, one possibility, and I don't know because they're meeting today. I don't know what they're going to recommend. But one possibility is they'll say, well, let's just restrict it for women. Well, I don't think that's a good idea because in the AstraZeneca vaccine, there were men. It may be broader than we think. And the problem is the world needs vaccinations. We can't exclude women. We need to get to herd immunity on a global level. So my sense, what I would do if I were on the committee, what I would recommend is that you have a warning label. And so the physician understands the problem, the potential for a problem, and the patient understands the potential for the problem. This is a treatable complication. The thing is, if you know it's an immune-mediated response, you treat it, the immune response. The problem is in the past they anticoagulated when they saw clots, and that's the opposite of what you should do. So I think there's a way to do it. It's with a warning label, making sure that doctors know how to treat it, making sure that patients know what the likely problem is. But I would definitely approve it with a warning label. But I do not know what they're going to do. So we'll see. So at the end, I just want to do a couple of shout-outs for everybody. First of all, I want to do a big shout-out to Courtney and her friends in the Bahamas who've been loyal followers. I want to say hello. I want to do a special shout-out to David Beckman, an MS2 student who's having his golden birthday. He turns 25 on the 25th of April. But since it's not 2025, I'm going to call it a gold-plated birthday. It's not really a true golden birthday. It's, close enough. But anyway, happy birthday. And then, of course, the signs of spring are everywhere. And I always use one particular good sign of spring. To me, the best way is when you see a rare surprise of nature, which is dachshunds rolling in the grass. So I'm looking for that this weekend. If I see that, it's a true sign of spring. So anyway, have a great weekend, and I can't wait to see you.